Hello, this is Will Faerber from Art to Ride, and today we're going to do a session on schooling the young horse. This is Feugo, who's been in training with us for about a year, coming on something like that. He was bought by one of our students, not when she was with us, but a trainer picked the horse out for her, and it wasn't too long before the horse was having a great deal of difficulty, and the horse became more and more fractious and just even difficult to handle on the ground. What was basically happening, this horse, I've seen the sail tape of the horse, and the horse was very crammed into a frame. Its neck was very pulled in with draw reins, and then the next trainer tried to do even more of that. And when we started him, he literally had no neck at all. You maybe remember seeing him in some earlier videos that we've done of him, but his neck was literally so narrow, it had no top line whatsoever, and just had this kind of bizarre neck that was only about a foot wide, and it was just so used to pulling back up into his body like a turtle. He would just suck it back like in a big S shape and very broken over at the third or fourth vertebrae. So we literally had to, as with all of them, retraining or rehabbing horses just a matter of going back and filling in the gaps in the horse's training and starting all over again. So that's what leads to all these frustration on the part of the horse. People generally are so often ask them to work in frames that are totally uncomfortable for the horse, and if the horse rebels, then they try to force the horse in through it. And some horses will take that kind of training, very dull horses, but more sensitive ones will not. They will just get worse and more fractious and become nearly impossible to work. So we have to just go back to the beginning of training and start all over again. That's the good news, is that it doesn't really, once again, take any great mastermind to do any of this, to do it correctly. It takes a lot more work to do it incorrectly. So once again, we've just gone back and gotten the horse stretching into the contact, allowing him to stretch out. And you notice he's developed a really nice rhythm in his gaits now. Now, this is another horse that I wanted to talk about a little bit, because when the woman who owns him bought him, Tanya, she, even in his vet report, he was always short on the left hind leg, and he was certainly that way when he came to us, and seemed to be having a great deal of difficulty. He was very roach-backed, which you can see now is really not the case at all. We had our osteopath from Canada, Chantal Periel, work on the horse, and she did a wonderful job in one session. It really was one of the most amazing cases of what a good osteopath or chiropractor can do with a horse and how they can help you. Now, I've seen a lot of these kind of difficulties work their way out over time, but I have no doubt in this horse's case, because as soon as she worked on him, literally the roach in his back, which most people would think is a conformational issue and there's nothing you can do about, was almost gone in a day, and now, as you can see, is barely there at all. So I'm sure the horse was uncomfortable in his gaits and in his stride, because he was short striding, and as I said, now, as you can see, he's completely even, and he's been completely even since the day that Chantal worked on him. One of the most amazing success stories, and a horse that I've ever seen come around so quickly to that kind of work. I certainly have seen body work help horses a great deal, but this was one that it just made a huge difference to from day one. I mean, this horse was incapable of cantering without cross-firing and switching to the opposite lead, and couldn't hold his canter barely at all. And as soon as we solved that problem, he's just been, his training has been kind of straightforward. So really, that's something, if you have a good body worker that you can trust, unfortunately, like everything else, you have to be sure that you're working with a good one. We have found, we've looked very high and low to find ones that we think are really good at what they do. So once again, you can see how little, I'm still at the point with this horse where I lunge him before I ride him, but what you just saw was the whole length of his lunging. It took 3 or 4 minutes. He's stretching out. And with the young horse, it's just best that we keep them in the same schedule of what they're doing, that we don't try to jump around and do different things different day. Horses work best when they have a system that they work in, then they know what's going to come, and we build on that foundation is the idea, rather than trying to skip from thing to thing and have them do some of this one day and some of that the next day, and some days we jump on and try to ride without being lunging. But this level, until a horse, my basic rule is that when you get on a horse, when you can get on them, they will calmly stretch in the walk. Then you're ready to maybe start riding without the lunging. But this was a horse who, if you got on him, he'd be very sticky. He was extremely behind the leg, and which you'll even see some incidents of us. Now, we still deal with some of those problems. So I'm going to have a lot more success if I stick to my program and just get him lunging and stretching into the contact. Gives him an opportunity to get working over his back, and you see how he does beautifully here. And once again, you see how you cannot really see the horse's break in his neck any longer. So it's taken about a year, as it always does, to heal that, just letting him stretch out so he's not so rubbery in the neck, and every time you touch the reins, he would just come behind the bridle, or in his case, he would actually come behind the bridle and suck back against your leg and refuse to move forward. But we can see now that most of the time that's pretty much over. He drops into the contact and goes pretty nicely. Once again, this is about all it takes me to lunge him, is a few minutes in each direction. But I still do that at this level just to be sure that, once again, that he's still in the system. A good test with this horse of his canter, and once again, we've just started cantering this horse. We've done mostly trot with him for the last year, but we just started cantering, and after the work with Chantel, his canter improved greatly, and he's able to balance in the canter and stay in the lead and not swap leads. He still, once again, he will have a little problem every now and then, but compared to what it was, it's really pretty good, and we can correct him very quickly. So he's beautifully stretching into that contact. You can see how nicely he's working over his back. And once again, if you look at his back behind the saddle there, if you go back and look at some of the earlier videos of this horse, you will see a big hump there that's no longer there. So this horse was very roached back, and as I said, we have been able to take care of that. And by virtue of that, his gaits have become very even, and he's become a lot easier to ride. A lot easier to ride, that is. Stretching beautifully into the contact here, and that's just what we're looking for. Remember, with young horse, what we're trying to do is, once we get the back up, we want to ride that flow of energy. That's what it's all about. Someone asked me the other day about, well, do you turn by pulling on this rein or pulling by that rein? No, when the horse is correctly trained, all you do is put your body in the position of the turn, and the horse will turn because the energy flows. We're riding the flow through the horse, so to speak. And once you start riding that, it makes riding much more exciting. People say to me very often, well, don't I get bored? I used to be a 3-day event rider, and I fox hunted all my life and this kind of stuff. And people go, don't you just bored just riding around a ring? But no, to ride like this, the way we ride, takes so much concentration. And because they're working up through the backs, it gives me that same feeling of galloping and cross country, like that feeling of freedom, when we're really one with the horse and we feel that energy flow underneath us and through the horse. And that's what we're looking for, and that's what makes it exciting and really interesting, and of course takes every bit of your concentration. So once again, we can see with this horse now in the stretch and the trot how nicely that neck and the whole top line of the neck is lit up. So when I started this horse, and what you may find very often is with horses that are very weak, as this one was, when we first started trotting him, he just would hang his neck straight down with his nose literally in the dirt, because when he turned loose of the bottom muscles underneath his neck, there's nothing there to hold the neck up. And when they do that, we don't want to try to pull him up. We just want to let him stay there. And in a little bit of time, as they develop more muscle, they will just start to come up, and which is what happened with this horse. As you can see now, when he trots, he carries his neck kind of up and out, and that's what we want to do. But we have to build the strength, and this horse was just an extreme case. I've almost never seen a horse's neck that was messed up as this one was, in the sense that it was just, he would just suck it back at you into his body, into this kind of S shape, breaking at the third or fourth vertebrae, and just refused to move forward. So once again, we've gotten to the other side of that. So when I get on, like I do with all my horses, all I'm looking for the horse to do is just get that sense of it flowing through and just stepping up forward into the contact. This horse is a little bit, at this stage, it's a little bit like having a car that's misfiring a little bit, We're trying to get that sense of it just flowing forward, and he'll stop up a little bit like he does there. And then what you see me do is just ask him quietly to move on forward again and start to add a little bit of swing to that walk. Very slowly. And sometimes you may see my hands go back and forth a little bit like there, and what I'm really doing there is just following. I'm not pulling on him, I'm just following the motion of his mouth so that he can't escape the contact with the bridle till he gets all the way stretched down there and gets into a better walk. And you can see this walk always starts out a little slow with this horse, some days better than others. And that's what you always have to do when you're gauging how long to lunge, as you start to read your horses. And with this one, if it were his owner going to get on him, I would have lunged him quite a bit longer there, just to be sure that he was really settled and exactly where I want him to be without any chance of anything else happening. Once again, remember, every horse, when you get on to different horses that we get on in life, they're kind of like waves. Think of it as like surfing, If you've only surfed a 2-foot wave, you're not going to go out and get on a 10-foot wave. Well, every horse has a different level of their wave, so to speak, and as they get working over their backs and get stronger, and the young ones, that wave can be very, very strong, as it is now with this horse. So we have to be sure that we can handle whatever might come up. But I always say to people, it's not whether you can ride a horse, it's whether you can ride a horse when something goes wrong. That is, when the horse decides to be resistive or something startles the horse. There's not a horse in the world, that they are alive, and there's things that can happen that, can set them off, and you better be ready to deal with that, because we never know when it's going to happen. And there's a little case of that with this horse later on, mainly because we were working this horse about a week or so ago, And I was lunging his owner on him. He was just doing absolutely beautifully. And unfortunately, a man was working on our sprinkling system and accidentally turned on the sprinkler that was about 4 foot from this horse's head. Now, these are sprinklers that shoot out about 50 feet, you know, so you can imagine the force of that. So he got shot right in the side of the head and body with a cannon, you know, so to speak, or a water cannon. Which really shocked him, you know, and put him into a very defensive mode. And it has taken me about a week or so to get him back over that, you know. It's just like when we jump horses, you know, when we jump young horses. Most young horses will jump pretty good until they start having a problem, you know, and if you start to jump too soon, and that's the trouble with jumping horses too big too soon, is if they have an accident or something goes a little wrong, it'll freak them out and they'll never want to go over a jump again. But if we've built up a foundation of understanding with them by jumping a lot of very small fences and building up the combinations and this sort of thing over time, you know, they get a good foundation in the job that they're being asked to do. And if they make a little mistake, it's not going to blow their mind. But once again, with a young horse, that can happen. That's why, you know, you never want to be on a horse, for instance, that you're afraid of. You know, if you're nervous, you're going to transmit that to the horse and you're going to create more problems. Or just simply a horse that, you know, if you can't, you know, sit to the worst case scenario, then it's not a horse that you should be on, because this is what also happens with young horses. If something goes wrong a little bit and somebody goes off of them, well, it probably happened by accident the first time, but if somebody goes off of them, they will repeat that behavior again, and they develop triggers. And this horse is kind of like that. His trigger is where his head and neck is. As long as I get him working out, stretching like this, he's really quite good. But even if you try to take any contact at all, he'll immediately start to suck his neck back into the body, and you'll see that here in a little bit he does just that. And once again, this is the kind of thing that I felt was kind of set off by this incident the other day, because he was going so well, and then all of a sudden he became very defensive again after suddenly getting blasted with this sprinkler. So those things affect, just like a young child, you know, some small thing may happen to them that, you know, affects a child's mind in a very bad way that an adult would never even think of. Well, horses are the same way. When they're young and immature, if some bad thing happens, even if it's not that great, but something that startles them, you know, something like that, you know, can cause a great deal of difficulty. That's why it's so important that we build our foundation right from the beginning of training and take our time with it, so that the horse builds up, you know, good experiences and becomes a partner in this work, rather than something that we have to force to do it all the time. So you can see here his walk is a little slower than I'd really like it to be. It's kind of a hotter day, and this is one of those warm bloods that, you know, tends to come out if it's 10 degrees hotter than it was the day before, and he kind of acts like he doesn't want to move. Many warm bloods are kind of like that. But he's starting to flow a little bit here, and once again, that's all I'm asking him to do, is just step up and just reach into that contact. That's all I want him to do at this level. Now, once again, I would like the walk to be more swinging than it is here, but I'm going to take my time. I'm not going to try to force it out of him or get after him in a severe way. So once again, you've got to remember that when horses are not used to carrying weight, which all young horses are not, and we have to build their strength to be able to do that, it can be very surprising even how a big horse can be affected by the weight of a rider. People tend to think of horses as being these big animals that, you know, can just do anything we ask them to do because they're so big and strong, or that they're not sensitive. Once again, all animals feel pain at the same level of sensitivity. You know, we as humans don't have a lock on that, so to speak. So when you know, whip a horse, it feels it just like it would if your child were being whipped. And once again, if you're judicious in these sort of things, once in a while if a horse deserves something, well, you know, if they're being fractious, it's kind of funny because they kind of know that. But if you're not just in how you discipline them, they very soon will take umbrage with that, so to speak. And you may find yourself having more difficulties than you had to begin with. So I'm just letting him get forward here and just take his time, stepping into the walk, stretching. Because I just want him to enjoy this. Some days they come out and they're fresher than other days, or they have more energy, or they feel stronger over their backs, just like you and I. We don't get up feeling exactly the same every day. Well, horses are just like that. Now, of course, as they go on in training, we hope that that training develops in them a real sense of purpose in what we're doing here, and also that we're not going to hurt them. So once again, they're going to become willing participants in all this. So now he's starting to stretch nicely in that walk. The walk's starting to step a little more actively, but it's not as active as I would like. You'll see when I come back to the walk later, it will even look better. So this is quite good. And what you're going to see in a little bit here, I start to trot this horse, and what you'll see is that he doesn't want to trot, and something spooks him a little bit, and he jumps quite a bit into the air with me. But you'll notice that when he does that, I don't make any big deal of it. I don't punish the horse for it. I just go right back to work like nothing really happened. And that's what you should do. Once again, very often I see people get angry with the horse and then they take it out. You know, the only time you can discipline a horse is during the moment. Now you'll see what here, one of his triggers, he starts sucking his neck back, you see, like that, and he starts curling behind the bridle, and I'm trying to get him to move. And he decides, oh, he's going to do that a little bit. Now, once again, for me, that's no big deal. But if he had done that to his owner, he'd be in trouble, or maybe a rider with less experience. But you see, once again, how when he did that, I didn't punish him. All I did was just send him on forward, let him get over it, and start moving forward and swinging active again. In other words, I don't punish him for that. I just go on and put him to work like nothing really happened. And of course, I reward him because he did do finally what I wanted him to do, which was to move forward off my leg. He just did it a little more actively than I might have wanted there for that one moment. But that's the only difficult spot that he has throughout the entire ride the next time he comes around. And once again, I felt like a little bit, since he had this little accident with a sprinkler last week, he got a little more like he wanted to suck back a little bit. It upset him a little bit because I'd gotten this horse to a point where he was just pretty calm and quiet about everything all the time. But, you know, once again, a little thing like that, he had no reason. He was going along perfectly fine, doing what he was supposed to be doing, and all of a sudden he gets a water cannon blast to the side of the head. So, as I said, it seemed to upset him for a few days, but he's coming around now, and once again, it was a little difficult getting into the trot there, but once it starts going, it's really good, and he starts flowing. And once again, that's all I'm doing is looking for that place that allows his back to light up, and I'm trying not to bring him behind the bridle. That's why you'll see with this horse, I can't take any backwards contact like you would maybe like you were trying to soften a horse's jaw or poll, but you can't do that with this horse because he would immediately just either suck back or want to curl the neck up. So everything here is just getting him back out and getting him swinging over his back. And once again, if you go back and look at these videos compared to some of the older videos, you'll see he's already starting to lift off the ground. His trot is very even. His stride is very even now. And other than that one little difficulty, is about the only little difficulty that he has throughout the lesson. But once again, that was kind of his trigger. You know, his trigger is you start to move him up, and he starts sucking back. And if you don't have the neck in just the right place, and you'll see I make another transition from the walk later on. He does it absolutely beautifully. So here he's stretching all the way into the contact, and look how beautiful that frame is now. Once again, this is where he can build. And once I get him from there, then I can start to bring the pole up at times and test how far I can bring the pole up without changing the gait. Remember, that's the whole thing. If your frame destroys the movement, the frame isn't worth anything if it's stopping the horse from moving. What good is a frame? And riding is about movement. It's not, we're not creating statues that are going to stand still. So you see here I brought his pole up about as far as it can come right there, but I still have a good working trot over his back. He's still swinging quite nicely. And of course, go to a little leg yield there. He wants to bend a little more than I want him to in the neck. He's very rubbery in the neck, this horse. So then I come back to just a little bit of shoulder in there and go right back into the stretch and let him lengthen the neck all the way back out again. And there he gets all back into that frame. So we see throughout all of that, his trot really didn't change, and that's what I'm looking for. So as I bring him up and down, I want to keep this nice big working trot that we see here. Now this is a good working trot over this horse's back. That's what we're looking for. But it's not an extended trot. So, it's, as I said, it's kind of the biggest natural stride. The horse just tracking up into the tracks of the front feet. And you can see it, as with most young horses, I try to change directions there, and there's a little moment of resistance. Because remember, bend from side to side is depending on the horse lifting its back. No horse can be bent laterally until it's bent longitudinally, until the back lifts up. That's again why we see so many upper-level dressage horses today that actually don't bend. So here I come back in just another little leg yield. So whatever I do one direction, I'm going to do the other direction. Just like that. He accepts that really nicely. So I come right back to the stretch. But I want it to keep flowing. I want to feel that energy. As I said, in the walk with this horse, it's very hard because he feels like a car that's stuttering. Kind of, he gets it for a moment and then slows down and kind of feels like the engine misfires, so to speak. But once I get him into the trot here and over that initial hump of the transition, then he's absolutely beautiful and locks in very quickly. You can see how nice and relaxed his ears are as he's stretching there into the contact. But once again, as I said before, this horse has a trigger that he's learned, which was what happened from draw reining, him being over draw reined to death. So you can see here, this is a perfect example, another example of a horse that was bought by a trainer, picked out from somebody, and then within a few weeks or a month, the trainer had the horse so unrideable that then she tells the owner that the horse is no good and it must have been drugged or this and that when they bought it, and every excuse except for the fact that maybe she just was trying to do the same thing even more so that they were doing, was to cram him deeper into a frame, which was making the horse very unhappy. So you can see here now, he's really quite happy in the work. And yes, he comes up and down a little bit right there. You see how he wants to overflex that neck a little bit. But I didn't lose much of the trot, but you'll see how I bring him right back out again. Now here I'm going to come to a canter. Now once again with this horse, I've just started cantering him. His canter was very unbalanced. He cross-cantered a lot and actually ran a lot in the canter. But now he's coming back to a really nice balanced canter. So once again, the canter is good enough to work. So it makes sense to do it. And you'll see how I quickly take him through all the same exercises, leg yields, shoulder ins, and then counter canters with him. Notice how I'm never holding against his mouth. I'm always letting him come forward. And even here I'm letting him stretch in the canter. Remember, we ultimately want to stretch horses in all three gaits and see how that brings him up over his back. That's really good. That's what we're looking for there. So the horse has to learn to hold itself up. That's where self-carriage comes from. No horse that's ever held against the bridle ever becomes light. They become behind the bit when they finally break at the third vertebrae, but they never become light and in real self-carriage. So very nice there. Here I just put him into a little bit of a shoulder four. Let his head come up a little bit there. It's good. He doesn't break over, so I'm happy with that. Now down the next long side, I'm going to do a little counter canter here, single loop canter, which I've only done maybe once or twice before on the horse, which he does very nicely. And you'll notice that one direction is a little harder for him than the other, but it's good enough for today for the amount of canter that I want to do on the horse. Holds this quite nicely and balanced in this direction, comes right back around the other direction without losing the lead, which is really nice, without changing the tempo. So I reward him again for that by letting him have another stretch. And then I'm going to bring him back to the trot and let him stretch all the way out. I'm very happy with that. There's no problem whatsoever. You can see how he stayed nice and floppy-eared throughout all of that. And this is a horse with a lot of movement and a lot of thrust through his back. Once again, he's a pretty big wave, this horse. And that's often, as I say, what happens to so many dressage horses, that people who really aren't very good riders or not very experienced riders, or in other words, people who should be on a small wave or maybe even surfing in the chop, as they say on the beach. See how nicely he made that downwards transition and right back into a stretch. But as I said, you got to be sure that you're riding horses that you can deal with the worst thing that might happen when you're on them. So come back to walk and just let him relax again here. Now you'll notice about this whole workout, this workout in particular, this day was about 30-some minutes. And that's about what it should take with a young horse. 30 to 45 minutes, something like that. Very rarely over an hour. Once again, my rule, the only time I keep horses out longer than that is if I have a very nervous horse. And my rule of thumb, which should be any good riders, is you never want a nervous horse to go back to the barn, because if they go back nervous, they're going to come back out nervous. So if I have extremely nervous horses, at the time that I spend the most time with them, because I've got to get all the way until they relax. That's the most important thing. Remember, teaching relaxation is also a skill, teaching the horse that skill of being relaxed. So think of that as a goal, that, as opposed to just thinking that all these other things are goals, making them do this or that. But just the goal of coming out and being relaxed is a good goal. Now see how nicely he makes the upwards transition there into trot, and you can see how at that time he didn't suck the neck back at me like he did the first time that I tried to trot him. So his mind has gotten in gear and he's letting the energy flow through him and sort of forgot about his old stuff there a little bit. So once again here I bring his pole up a little bit, but I don't, there he wants to overflex a little too much, so now I've got to get it back a little longer again because I have to watch and be very careful about the break in his neck. But that's about it for him right there. That's a good height of his head and neck, about as high as he can be there. I let him change a little bit as he goes into the canter, because once again I'm not going to try to hold him in the transition. I'm not going to at this level try to make a perfect trot to canter transition. If I did, I would just annoy the horse. So if he changes the frame a little bit, that's perfectly fine. I'm going to adjust him once I get into the gait, and that's what you should do. Once you get the horse so it works very well in the gaits, then you can start worrying about transitions between the gaits. So keeping the horse happy in all this work, so we have a happy participant in all this. As you can see, and he breaks there a little bit. I come back and give him another stretch, so I don't punish him for breaking. I let him stretch a little bit, get balanced, and then I'm going to ask him to simply canter again. So he makes another little mistake there. I simply come back to the trot again, and then he starts off once again. So you see, I didn't make any big deal of any of that. When he got the wrong canter, I didn't whip him up. I just brought him back and started again, once again. You know, I'm never going to give up until I get what I want in terms of relaxation, as long as what I want is within the scope of what the horse can do. In this case, I know this horse is capable of cantering on the right lead now, so I'm going to ask until I get it. So here again, the canter in this direction is not quite as balanced as the other way. It's a little more difficult. He wants to suck the neck back a little bit more, but not bad. He does a leg yield in the canter. Once again, remember the leg yield must come before a circle. You can't do a good circle without a leg yield, because every circle should be a leg yield as we push the horse out into the contact with the outside rein. So here I'll let him stretch again a little bit. A little shoulder in here. And you can see if I do take too much rein that he gets a little unhappy in his mouth there, so I just release him again rather than try to hold deeper. And here again we go into the counter canter. Not quite as nice as the first one. He's a little more rubbery in his neck in this direction, but not bad. He holds the lead well, so for his level of training, that's perfectly fine. In other words, I'm not looking for perfection today. I'm looking for just a little bit of improvement in each thing. So if I keep my horses sound and improve a little bit every day, before long I have a nicely trained horse. But if you're training in such a way that you're spending more time with veterinarians than you are riding, because of the way you're riding, breaking the horse down, you're never going to get anywhere, because it takes time to build those muscles consistently. So we see so many beautiful horses, and you know, we see a lot of horses come over here from Europe that look good when they get here, and then we see them a year later and they're either completely finished, or you wouldn't even recognize it as the same horse as the back is dropped and we start seeing a big hollow behind the back. So that was really good. I was very happy with his canter there. So now I just come back to the stretch in the trot, and I work my way back down through the gates the same way I worked upwinds, coming back to the trot, one gear at a time. I don't skip any gears at this level of training. I come back at that good stretch in the trot. I was reaching into that, and once again, as I said, when I first started this horse, his neck was literally straight down with his nose dragging on the ground because he couldn't lift his neck up. Now he's getting strong enough that I can keep the same trot, and I can lift the neck up a little bit. This is all really good. So as I wind my way down in the workout today, all right, bring him up a little bit, see how he does there, see if he can hold it a little higher. And once again, that's pretty good, about right there. That's about as good as I could expect him to be. Notice the trot didn't change. It didn't get all shortened up, but he's able to carry his head and neck a little higher here, so that's good. And I'm going to go right back into the stretch again. So I'm just going to test that for a little bit. I know he's not going to be able to maintain it for a really long period of time. But he can, as you see, maintain his position over his back throughout the entire exercise. He just can't hold his neck up and do it the entire time. So that's the thing you've got to remember, is that we're looking to get the horse over his back and keep that, and then everything else comes along with that. And then, of course, the horse doesn't become resistive to the work. So I make a nice downwards transition here in a few moments after I get him stretched all the way out like that. That's what I'm looking for. There, all the way into the contact. And notice, I mean, this was a horse that used to be any little noise around the ring would set him off and this kind of thing. So now he's able to come out and stay pretty floppy-eared throughout the entire workout, changing directions through the figure eight, which tells me a lot about whether the horse's back is up or not. You notice when I tried to do that figure eight earlier, he immediately kind of threw his head up in the air and didn't stay over his back. So it means a lot when we get to the point where we can change directions, as you see me here doing there, without having to take the horse up or lose the position that we had. So once again, that's about as high as his pole can be right there. That's pretty good for him. He's flexing at the pole and not back in the neck. That's about what I want. And with, as I said, with this horse, I can't take any, you'd never try to soften his mouth or anything like that, because he would just come behind the bridle. He doesn't need that. So pretty nice change of direction there. Bend quite nicely around my leg as I change directions. And once again, as you see, I didn't pull on one rein or the other. I just let my body come around, let my outside shoulder come around. I put my body in the position of the turn, my outside leg back, inside leg where it is. I give a little on the outside and take a little on the inside and let my outside shoulder come around. but it isn't that much. Even a horse at a very high level is not like, they're bending around a little 3-foot circle or something like that. So when we talk about bend, it's always the middle of the horse's back. That's what's important, not the neck. So this is really good as he stretches all the way back out here. That's exactly what I'm looking for. And as I said, notice how I've worked my way back through the gates just the way I worked my way up through them. So here, once again, I try to bring him up a little bit and see what I get. See if I can maintain it without shortening. I'm starting to feel like he's getting a little tired here now. But I'm still able to maintain a pretty good working gait, and I'm able to make a very nice downward transition into the walk where he steps into it without resisting the bridle. So that was a good workout for a young horse. And once again, this workout, particularly today, sometimes it might be a little longer, a little shorter. It depends on what I'm doing. But, 30 to 45 minutes, never over an hour with a young horse, unless it's just a very nervous horse that you just keep in the ring long enough to get him to relax. And, of course, you wouldn't want to be working a nervous horse that whole time. And that is, making him work. You'd want to just keep him out there and let him walk until he relaxes. The beauty of the walk is we can do a lot of it without damaging the horse. So I finished in the same place I started once I got him, which is a nice stretch in the walk. And notice that his walk is more active and lively now as he's stepping over and letting the energy flow through his body more. So that's how we work a young horse. So this horse has, basically, he's gotten over his back in all 3 gaits. Everything is working well. So now what I'll do, the next year will be just doing the same thing, bringing him up, adding more movement slowly into it, but basically giving him time to let this neck and top line continue to develop. This is Will Faerber from Art to Ride. Hope that helps.